The last thing I expected to hear after kissing my 5-year-old daughter goodbye was a nurse whisper. If her father hadn't signed that form, she'd already be in surgery. I stopped walking. My hand was still wrapped around the cold metal push bar on the pediatric ICU doors at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. My vision blurred from tears, and for a second I wondered if grief was making me imagine things. Another nurse answered quietly. I know, her mother has no idea. The hallway suddenly felt too small. I turned, but both women had already disappeared into a supply room. 5 minutes earlier, Dr. Patel had stood beside Lily's bed with that look every parent dreads. I'd seen it before while notifying military families about fallen soldiers. I never imagined I'd be on the receiving end. We've exhausted every option, he'd said gently. I think it's time to say your goodbyes. Those words had hollowed me out. Lily looked so small beneath the white hospital blanket. Her brown hair spread across the pillow, and a clear tube rested beneath her nose. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, almost cruel in its normalcy. I brushed a strand of hair away from her forehead. I love you more than every star in Kentucky, I whispered, repeating the bedtime line I'd used since she was 3. She didn't answer. The sedatives had taken her hours earlier. I kissed her forehead, squeezed her tiny hand, and somehow forced my feet toward the door. Then I heard those nurses. If her father hadn't signed that form. Signed what form? The doctor had just told me there wasn't anything left to try. I stood frozen in the hallway until someone bumped my shoulder with a rolling medication cart. I'm sorry, ma'am. I stepped aside automatically. Army training teaches you to keep moving even when your world is falling apart. 46 years old. 23 years in the Army. 3 overseas deployments. Countless emergencies. None of it prepared me for walking away from my own child. My phone buzzed. Daniel. I stared at his name before answering. Emily. His voice sounded tired, almost rehearsed. Did they tell you? They said there's nothing else they can do. A long pause. I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes. So am I. He sighed. I'll head back to the hospital after I finish with the insurance paperwork. Insurance paperwork? The words barely registered. Fine, I said quietly. We hung up. Daniel and I had been separated for almost a year, not officially divorced, just stuck. He lived in Franklin, Tennessee. I was stationed at Fort Campbell. Lily split her time between us whenever my schedule allowed. 3 days ago, I'd been preparing inventory reports on base when Daniel called saying Lily had collapsed after breakfast. By the time I reached Nashville, she'd already been admitted to the ICU. Doctors believed she'd suffered a catastrophic allergic reaction that triggered multiple organ failure. Everything happened so fast that I'd barely had time to breathe. Yet now, those nurses had made one sentence undo everything I'd been told. I walked back toward the ICU desk. A young receptionist looked up. Can I help you? Yes. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need to know exactly what form my husband signed. The receptionist blinked. I'm sorry. I overheard 2 nurses talking. Her expression changed for just a fraction of a second. Then she smiled. I'm afraid I don't know anything about that. It wasn't the words that bothered me. It was the look. The kind people give when they're trying very hard not to say something. I'd spent enough years reading faces during Army briefings to recognize it instantly. Someone here knew more than they were willing to tell me. And for the first time since Lily had been admitted, I wasn't just grieving. I was suspicious. The receptionist's smile never changed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but your husband's been handling most of the paperwork. Most of the paperwork. That sentence hit me harder than it should have. My husband, I asked. We're still legally married, she said with an awkward shrug. The system lists him as the primary emergency contact. I stared at her. No, I'm her mother. I understand. No, I said a little more firmly. I don't think you do. She looked around before lowering her voice. If you have questions, you'll need to speak with patient services. She slid a business card across the counter as though that settled everything. It didn't. I thanked her anyway and walked toward the elevators. Years in the Army had taught me something important. The person behind the desk is rarely the person making the decisions. Outside, the July heat wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Nashville traffic crawled past the hospital entrance. Ambulances came and went with practiced urgency. Families sat on benches holding paper coffee cups, each one carrying a different kind of heartbreak. I sat in my truck but couldn't bring myself to start it. Instead, I opened my phone and looked through pictures of Lily. One showed her proudly holding up a bluegill she'd caught at my father's pond outside Clarksville. Another showed her wearing my oversized Army patrol cap. I look just like you, Mommy. You look much cuter than I do. She'd laughed so hard she'd nearly fallen off the porch swing. The memory made my chest ache. My phone rang again. Daniel. This time I answered on speaker. Where are you? In the parking lot. I just got here, he said. I'll meet you upstairs. I'm coming with you. No. The word slipped out before I could soften it. Silence. Finally he sighed. Emily, this isn't the time. Actually, I looked back toward the hospital entrance. I think it is. 20 minutes later, we stood outside Lily's room together. Daniel looked exhausted. His expensive navy polo was wrinkled. His beard hadn't been trimmed. If I didn't know him so well, I might have believed every bit of it. He reached for my shoulder. I stepped back. He noticed. His hand dropped. We both want what's best for Lily. I looked straight into his eyes. What form did you sign? His forehead wrinkled. What are you talking about? I overheard 2 nurses. His expression changed for barely a heartbeat. Then it disappeared. I signed admission paperwork. Nothing else. No, he answered too quickly. Dr. Patel walked toward us carrying a tablet. I'm glad both of you are here. I didn't waste the opportunity. Doctor, I have a question. Of course. I overheard someone say my husband signed a form that affected Lily's treatment. For the first time since we'd met, Dr. Patel hesitated. Only for a second. But I saw it. I'm afraid I can't discuss internal communications. I'm her mother. And I'm respecting patient privacy. I frowned. What does that even mean? I'm standing right here. Daniel spoke before the doctor could. Emily. No. I turned back to Dr. Patel. Did anyone ask my permission before making treatment decisions? The appropriate authorizations were obtained. What authorizations? I'm sorry. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. I can't discuss specific documentation right now. Then he excused himself. Just like that. Daniel rubbed his temples. Please don't make this harder. I stared at him. My daughter is dying. My daughter too. Then why does everyone keep talking to you instead of me? He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced down the hallway toward an administrative office. Only for a moment. But I followed his eyes. A woman in business clothes stood behind the glass door. The instant she saw us looking, she closed a folder and walked away. Daniel noticed I'd seen her. Who was that? I asked. I don't know. You looked right at her. I said I don't know. He turned and walked into Lily's room before I could stop him. I remained in the hallway. My instincts were screaming now. Not because of one strange conversation. Not because of one mysterious form. Because every answer I'd received since arriving at Vanderbilt sounded polished. Without actually answering the question. That evening I drove to a FedEx office in Green Hills instead of heading back to Fort Campbell. I printed every document I could access through Lily's online patient portal. Lab reports, medication lists, doctor's notes. Then I noticed something strange. Under legal documents, there was a section marked, one document unavailable for patient viewing. Unavailable. Why would a parent be blocked from seeing paperwork related to her own child? I folded the papers neatly, slid them into a manila folder, and made one decision. Tomorrow morning, before I went anywhere else, I was requesting Lily's complete medical records in person. Something wasn't adding up, and I intended to find out exactly what it was. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily lying motionless beneath that white hospital blanket. Then I'd hear those nurses again. If her father hadn't signed that form. By 6:30 the next morning, I was back at Vanderbilt. The lobby smelled like fresh coffee and disinfectant. Volunteers in red jackets greeted visitors with warm smiles, and the little gift shop was already open, selling balloons and stuffed animals that suddenly felt cruelly out of place. I walked straight to Health Information Management. A woman in her early 60s sat behind the counter, reading glasses balanced on the end of her nose. "Good morning," she said kindly. "How can I help you?" "I need a complete copy of my daughter's medical records." She smiled. "Certainly. Name? Lily Carter." She typed for nearly a minute. Then her fingers stopped. Her expression changed. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She looked at the monitor again. "No, just a moment." She disappeared through a secure door. 5 minutes later, she returned with a supervisor. That caught my attention immediately. The supervisor introduced herself as Karen. "There are a few documents requiring additional authorization." I frowned. "I'm Lily's mother." "Yes. So why would I need additional authorization?" Karen offered the practiced smile I'd begun to hate. "It's simply hospital policy." "I'd like to see the policy." She hesitated. "We can provide the available records today? And the unavailable ones, they require administrative review." I folded my arms. "Then start the review." After another long pause, Karen sighed. "It may take a little while. I've got time." Apparently, she realized I wasn't leaving. An hour later, she returned carrying a thick envelope. "I'll need you to sign here." I signed. She handed me the records. Everything looked ordinary at first. Blood work, medication logs, nurses' notes, radiology reports. I sat in the hospital cafeteria with a black coffee I never touched and started reading page by page. Years in Army logistics had taught me to notice tiny inconsistencies, dates, times, missing signatures, formatting differences. I was halfway through the stack when one page made me stop breathing. Treatment refusal authorization. Date? 3 days earlier. Time: 9:42 a.m. Reason: parent declines emergency surgical intervention after discussing risks. Below that, my name, Emily Carter. Electronic signature. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because it was impossible. I had been standing inside Warehouse 4 at Fort Campbell conducting inventory at 9:42 that morning. 20 soldiers could verify it. I had never spoken to anyone at Vanderbilt until Daniel called almost an hour later. I looked closer. The signature wasn't even my normal electronic signature. Someone had tried to copy it. Close enough to fool a computer, not close enough to fool me. My hands started shaking. A young employee pushing a supply cart stopped beside my table. "Ma'am," I looked up. "You okay?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. He glanced at the paperwork. "Medical records," I nodded. "My daughter's." "I'm sorry." He started to leave, then stopped. "If you think something's missing," he lowered his voice. "Sometimes it helps to ask for the audit log." "The what?" "The electronic access history." Before I could ask another question, another employee called his name. He quickly walked away. "Audit log." I wrote the words on a napkin. 10 minutes later, I returned upstairs. Karen saw me coming. "I forgot to mention something," I said pleasantly. "I'd also like the electronic audit history showing everyone who accessed Lily's records." She blinked. "We don't normally—" "I'd like it anyway. I'll have to ask our IT department." "Please do." She disappeared again. This time it took nearly 40 minutes. When she returned, her smile was gone. "I'm afraid we can't release that today." "Why not?" "It requires legal approval." "Because someone accessed the file." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She looked exhausted, like someone caught between doing the right thing and keeping her job. As I gathered my paperwork, another voice quietly spoke behind me. "Mrs. Carter." I turned. A woman wearing navy scrubs stood near the hallway. She looked around before stepping closer. "I shouldn't be talking to you." Her hands trembled slightly. "But I'm going to regret it forever if I don't." "My name is Rachel." She swallowed hard. "I work nights in pediatric ICU." I immediately recognized her. She was one of the nurses I'd seen outside Lily's room. Rachel glanced over both shoulders. Then she leaned in so quietly I could barely hear her. "You were supposed to receive 3 phone calls before that refusal was approved." I stared at her. "I never got any calls." "I know." Her eyes filled with tears. "That's why I wanted you to know." She took one shaky breath. "Someone made sure you never did." Before I could ask another question, Rachel hurried away down the hallway, leaving me standing there with a forged signature and the terrifying realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. Someone had deliberately kept a mother away from her daughter's last chance to live. I drove back to Fort Campbell with Lily's medical records sitting on the passenger seat like they weighed 100 pounds. Every few miles I glanced at the folder. The forged signature was still there. It hadn't magically disappeared. Someone had signed my name. Someone had blocked 3 phone calls. And someone inside Vanderbilt knew it. By the time I reached my small on-base townhouse, the Kentucky sun was beginning to set. I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter and noticed Lily's pink rain boots by the back door. She'd forgotten them after spending a weekend with me 2 weeks earlier. I'd been meaning to take them back to Daniel's house. Instead, I sat on the floor and held one of them in my hands. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. My phone buzzed. It was my commanding officer, Colonel Harris. "Emily, don't worry about work." "I'm sorry, sir." "Forget work." His voice softened. "Take whatever time you need." "I appreciate that." "We're all praying for Lily?" I thanked him before hanging up. The Army had always been my second family. Right then, they were the only people who didn't make me feel like I was losing my mind. The next morning, I stopped by Daniel's house in Franklin. It was a quiet neighborhood of brick homes, neatly trimmed lawns and American flags hanging from front porches. His SUV sat in the driveway. He answered after the second knock. His eyes widened. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know." He stepped aside. "Come in." The house looked strangely normal. The coffee maker was still on. The television played a morning news show. Lily's coloring books were stacked beside the couch exactly where she'd left them. For a moment, I almost forgot why I'd come. Then I remembered the forged signature tucked inside my purse. I have a question. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Okay. Were you ever asked to approve surgery for Lily? His face stayed surprisingly calm. They asked me about several treatment options. What did you tell them? I trusted the doctors. Did you refuse surgery? He frowned. No. Did you sign anything? Admission forms. Anything else? I don't remember. That answer bothered me more than if he'd simply said yes. How do you forget signing paperwork while your child is dying? You don't remember? It was chaos, Emily. I studied his face. We'd been married 16 years. I knew his habits. Whenever he lied, he'd scratch the inside of his left wrist. His hand slowly drifted there now. Just once. That tiny movement said more than his words ever could. Before I could press him further, the doorbell rang. Daniel opened it. His mother walked in carrying a casserole dish wrapped in aluminum foil. She stopped when she saw me. Oh, not exactly the warmest greeting. I thought you'd gone back to base. I came to see Lily's father. She set the dish on the kitchen counter. You know, she crossed her arms. People have been asking where you've been. I stared at her. What does that mean? Church friends? She shrugged. They wondered why Daniel's been here every day while you've been away. Away? Well, you are in the army. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I drove here the moment Daniel called. She gave me a thin smile. That's not what everyone's saying. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Mom? No. She looked directly at me. People think your career has always come first. I waited. I honestly expected Daniel to defend me, to tell his mother I'd left work immediately, that I'd spent every possible hour beside Lily. Instead, he said nothing. The silence was louder than any accusation. I stood up. I should go. Daniel followed me onto the front porch. Don't listen to her. I listened to you. He looked confused. What? You let her say I abandoned our daughter. I didn't. You didn't stop her. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. As I walked to my truck, my phone buzzed with a notification from Facebook. Someone had tagged Daniel in a community prayer post. Hundreds of comments filled the screen, praying for this devoted father. You're carrying such a heavy burden alone. Your little girl is blessed to have such a strong dad. Then I saw another comment. Her mother should be ashamed for choosing the army over her child. More followed. Some women never should have had kids. Poor Daniel has been doing everything himself. I stared at the screen until it blurred. None of those people knew me. None of them knew I'd spent 23 years serving this country while raising Lily. None of them knew I'd driven nearly 70 miles every chance I got just to read bedtime stories. Yet somehow, someone had convinced an entire community that I was the absent parent. That afternoon, I met with an attorney recommended by a retired colonel from my unit. Her office overlooked the courthouse square in downtown Franklin. Her name was Sarah Bennett. Silver hair. No-nonsense handshake. Sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She listened without interrupting as I laid every document across her conference table. When I finished, she picked up the forged authorization form. She examined it for nearly a full minute. Then she quietly asked, Emily? Yes. Has anyone besides you questioned this signature? Not yet. She nodded slowly. Then she looked me straight in the eye. This doesn't feel like ordinary medical negligence. She tapped the page once. It feels like someone had a plan. Sarah didn't make promises. That was one of the first things I noticed about her. She didn't say, we're going to win. She didn't tell me everything would be okay. She simply gathered every page into a neat stack, slid the forged authorization back into its folder, and said, let's find out who benefited. There was something calming about that. For the first time in days, I wasn't reacting. I was investigating. Sarah gave me 3 assignments before I left her office. First, don't accuse anyone. I nodded. Second, don't post anything online. Okay. And third, she leaned forward. If someone from that hospital wants to talk, listen more than you speak. I drove back to Fort Campbell that evening with those words stuck in my head. Someone from the hospital. I wondered if Rachel had already said too much, or not enough. 2 days passed. Lily's condition hadn't changed. Doctors described it the same way every morning. Critical but stable. Those words sounded almost meaningless now. Stable wasn't getting better. It was simply surviving. I spent my days sitting beside her bed reading her favorite stories even though she couldn't respond. One afternoon I opened Charlotte's Web. Lily, I whispered, you always laughed when Wilbur got muddy. I smiled despite myself. You said pigs were just dogs who forgot their manners. A nurse passing by chuckled softly. I've never heard that one before. Lily made it up. The nurse smiled. She sounds like a funny little girl. She is. I caught myself. She is. Not was. Is. I refused to let that change. Around 8:30 that evening, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Normally I ignored those calls. This time I answered. Emily Carter. Yes. A nervous female voice replied. It's Rachel. I immediately stood up from the hospital chair. Are you okay? No. She sounded terrified. We can't talk on the phone. My stomach tightened. Then where? There's a Cracker Barrel off Interstate 65 in Goodlettsville. I know it. Tomorrow. She hesitated. 7 in the morning. Before I could ask another question, she hung up. Sarah insisted on coming with me. We arrived early and chose a booth near the back where no one could easily overhear us. The restaurant smelled like bacon, coffee, and biscuits. Retired couples chatted over breakfast. Country music played quietly through hidden speakers. It felt strangely normal. At exactly 7 o'clock, Rachel walked in wearing jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Hands shaking. She spotted us and sat down. I can't stay long. Sarah introduced herself. Rachel swallowed hard. If anyone finds out I'm here, you won't lose your job because of us, Sarah said. Rachel gave a sad little laugh. I've probably already lost it. The waitress poured coffee. None of us touched it. Rachel took a deep breath. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. She looked directly at me. But then I watched you reading to Lily. Her eyes filled. I couldn't sleep after that. I waited. She finally spoke. The doctors wanted to transfer Lily into emergency surgery the first afternoon. My heart stopped. What? Rachel nodded. There was still a chance. Dr. Patel told me there wasn't. He believed there wasn't. She corrected herself. After the surgery was canceled. I leaned forward. Canceled by who? Rachel looked around before lowering her voice. Your husband. My throat went dry. He said he had legal authority. He didn't. He showed paperwork. My signature was forged. Rachel slowly nodded. I know. Sarah asked quietly. Did anyone question it? One resident did. What happened? Rachel looked down at the table. The hospital administrator came upstairs. Administrator? Rachel nodded again. She said everything had been reviewed. I remembered the woman behind the glass office, the one Daniel had glanced toward. Woman in her 50s? I asked. Blonde hair. Rachel looked surprised. You've seen her? I think so. Rachel's voice dropped even lower. After she arrived, everyone stopped arguing. Silence settled over the table. Then Rachel said something that made every hair on my arms stand up. The surgery wasn't delayed because doctors didn't know what to do. She looked straight into my eyes. It was delayed because your husband kept insisting they wait for paperwork. I felt the room spinning. Wait for what paperwork? Rachel swallowed. The paperwork saying you refused treatment. Sarah and I looked at each other. Rachel reached into her purse. I shouldn't have this. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It wasn't a medical record. It was a photocopy of an internal nursing note. One sentence had been highlighted. Father requested no further intervention until maternal refusal authorization uploaded. Uploaded. Not signed. Uploaded. Meaning someone had expected my refusal. Before it even existed. Rachel stood. I have to go. I grabbed her hand. Rachel. She gave me a heartbreaking smile. I keep thinking, her voice cracked, if I'd spoken sooner. You were trying to protect your job. I was protecting myself. She wiped away a tear. And a little girl almost paid for it. She hurried toward the exit before I could respond. Sarah picked up the photocopy again. She read the highlighted sentence twice. Then she quietly said, Emily, I looked up. We're not dealing with one dishonest father anymore. She folded the paper carefully. We're looking at a conspiracy. I wish I could tell you I walked out of that Cracker Barrel feeling brave. I didn't. I sat in my truck for nearly 20 minutes with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. Rachel's words kept echoing in my mind. Your husband kept insisting they wait for paperwork. Not medicine. Not test results. Paperwork. Sarah knocked gently on my driver's side window. You okay? I forced a smile. No. She climbed into the passenger seat. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she broke the silence. Emily, there's one question we still haven't answered. What? Why? I looked at her. What does Daniel gain? That question stayed with me all the way back to her office in Franklin. Sarah's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building overlooking the courthouse square. She pulled several legal pads from a cabinet and began making a timeline across her whiteboard. Monday, Lily collapsed. Tuesday, hospital admission. Wednesday morning, emergency surgery discussed. Wednesday afternoon, treatment refusal uploaded. Thursday, I arrived. Friday, Doctors declared there were no remaining options. Sarah stepped back. We know what happened. She tapped the board. But motive wins cases. I don't understand. If someone forged your signature, she looked directly at me. They had a reason. I thought about it. Daniel wasn't a violent man. He wasn't reckless. If anything, he'd always been careful with money. Painfully careful. He'd compare grocery prices between stores. He once drove 45 minutes because another gas station was 8 cents cheaper. Sarah suddenly asked. When Lily was born, was there ever a lawsuit? I blinked. Yes. She immediately looked interested. Tell me. I hadn't thought about that in years. When Lily was born, there were complications during delivery. Sarah nodded. I remember you mentioning that. The umbilical cord wrapped around her neck. The memory still hurt. There was a delay before they performed the emergency C-section. And afterward, the hospital settled. How much? I don't know exactly. Daniel had handled most of the legal meetings while I was deployed overseas. I remember hearing something about a trust. Sarah froze. A trust? I never really understood it. She grabbed her laptop. Who represented Lily? I gave her the law firm's name. Within minutes, she found public court records. She read quietly for several seconds. Then she looked up. Oh, what? I think we just found the motive. My stomach tightened. Sarah turned the monitor toward me. The settlement itself was confidential. But one filing wasn't. It established something called the Lily Carter Medical Recovery Trust. I frowned. I've never seen that. It says the trust remains under court supervision until Lily turns 18. So, Sarah kept reading. If Lily dies? She stopped. What? The trustee gains immediate control of the remaining assets. I felt my heartbeat speeding up. Who's the trustee? Sarah scrolled. Then she whispered, Daniel Carter. The room went completely silent. How much money? I finally asked. She searched another filing. There isn't an exact number. Estimate. She looked uncomfortable. Based on the settlement and investment history. Another pause. Probably between $2 and $3 million. I honestly thought I'd misheard her. Million. She nodded slowly. I leaned back in my chair. No. I shook my head. Daniel loved Lily. I'm sure he did. He read bedtime stories. I'm sure he did. He coached her soccer team. Sarah didn't argue. Instead, she quietly asked, Emily, when was the last time Daniel talked about money? That question hit harder than she probably intended. Over the past year. Almost constantly. The mortgage. Credit cards. A business investment that had failed. A second mortgage I hadn't known he'd taken out until months later. He'd even borrowed money from his parents. Small conversations I had ignored suddenly lined up like puzzle pieces. Sarah wasn't finished. She opened another public filing. There are restrictions. What kind? The trustee can't simply spend the money. I let out a shaky breath. For Lily's benefit. Correct. So if she... I couldn't finish. Sarah nodded sadly. If Lily passes away, those restrictions become very different. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I whispered, I don't want to believe this. I know. I keep hoping there's another explanation. I hope there is too. Then Sarah reached across the desk and placed one finger on the forged authorization. But hope doesn't erase evidence. As if the day hadn't already given me enough, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered, Hello. His voice sounded strangely upbeat. I met with the insurance company today. Insurance. Again. They said we'll need to discuss some financial paperwork soon. I closed my eyes. Financial paperwork. Not Lily. Not surgery. Not doctors. Paperwork. I suddenly understood why Sarah had asked about motive. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer afraid of what we might find. I was afraid of what we already had. By the following Monday, Sarah's conference room looked less like a law office and more like an army operations center. Sticky notes covered one wall. A timeline stretched across another. Every phone call, every signature, every hospital visit had its place. She handed me a yellow legal pad. Read this. It was a list of everything we still needed. Electronic signature metadata, hospital access logs, cell phone records, security camera footage, phone carrier verification, copies of every email regarding Lily's treatment. It looked impossible. Sarah smiled. It isn't. You sound awfully confident. I've spent 28 years suing people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. She picked up a marker. They almost always make the same mistake. They get careless. They leave a trail. The first trail appeared 2 days later. Sarah had obtained my military duty records through the Army. Every hour of my workday had been documented. Security badge scans, vehicle gate entries, computer login records, even the inventory inspection I'd conducted that Wednesday morning. At exactly 9:42 a.m., the moment my electronic signature supposedly appeared on Lily's treatment refusal, I had been standing inside Warehouse 4 at Fort Campbell, conducting a quarterly equipment inspection with 6 other soldiers. Colonel Harris himself had signed the report. Sarah slid the document beside the forged authorization. They can't explain this away. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a tiny bit of hope. The second break came from my phone company. I had requested every incoming call during the week Lily became ill. 3 calls from Vanderbilt appeared, exactly as Rachel had said. But something immediately stood out. Each one lasted less than 2 seconds. 2 seconds wasn't enough time for a phone to ring. It meant something else. Someone had canceled the calls before they ever reached me. I stared at the records. They never actually tried to talk to me. Sarah nodded. They generated the appearance of contact, so later they could claim they called. Exactly. That afternoon, Sarah received another email. She read it once, then twice. Finally, she looked up. This is interesting. What? The hospital finally sent their electronic audit log. She printed several pages and spread them across the table. Most entries made sense. Doctors, nurses, lab technicians. Then one name appeared over and over again. Melissa Granger. Who is she? I asked. Sarah searched the hospital directory. Administrative services. The woman behind the glass office. Looks like it. Melissa had accessed Lily's records 17 separate times in 48 hours. Far more than any physician. What would an administrator need with my daughter's chart? I asked. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she circled every entry with a red pen. That's a question I'd love to ask under oath. 3 days later, another unexpected visitor showed up. Not at Sarah's office. At my townhouse on base. I answered the door to find a nervous young man holding a messenger bag. I hope I'm not bothering you. I don't believe we've met. My name's Ethan. He looked around before continuing. I work in Vanderbilt's IT department. Every instinct told me to be careful. What do you want? I can't stay. His voice shook. But I saw your name in the legal request. He opened the bag and removed a sealed envelope. I think this belongs with your case. What is it? I can't explain. Why not? Because I'd like to keep my job. He gave an awkward smile. At least until they fire me. I almost laughed. Almost. He handed me the envelope. Then quietly said, I have a daughter too. That was all. He turned around and walked back to his car. Sarah opened the envelope the next morning. Inside was a printed computer log. Every electronic signature leaves behind something called metadata. Time. Device. Internet address. User credentials. Most people never think about it. Sarah studied the page for nearly 5 minutes. Then she slowly looked up. Oh, Daniel. What? She pointed to one line. The signature refusing surgery wasn't submitted from Fort Campbell. I leaned closer. It wasn't even submitted from your phone. Then where? She tapped the address. It came from a desktop computer. Another pause. Inside Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I felt cold all over. So whoever forged my name, I was sitting in the hospital. Sarah nodded. And they weren't hiding it very well. Before either of us could say another word, my phone buzzed. Rachel. Her text message contained only one sentence. He's trying to convince people to change their statements. I immediately called her. She answered on the first ring. I don't have much time. What happened? I overheard Daniel. My heart pounded. He met with 2 supervisors yesterday. And Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. He said, she took a shaky breath. We all need to remember the same version of events. Neither Sarah nor I spoke. Rachel continued. I think he's getting desperate. After the call ended, Sarah quietly leaned back in her chair. Good. I looked at her. Good. She nodded. Desperate people stop thinking clearly. She closed the file and smiled for the first time since we'd met. And that's usually when they make the mistake that ends everything. When I hung up with Rachel, I expected Sarah to tell me we should file the lawsuit immediately. Instead, she did the exact opposite. We wait. I stared at her. Wait. Just a little longer. Sarah Daniel is trying to influence witnesses. I know. Then why aren't we stopping him? She folded her hands across the desk. Because right now he's nervous. So, I want him confident. I frowned. I don't follow. She smiled. If he thinks you've accepted Lily's fate, he'll stop being careful. It sounded risky. Too risky. What if we're wrong? Then we'll know soon enough. I wasn't comfortable with it. Every instinct I had from 23 years in the army told me to act before the situation got worse. But Sarah had spent nearly 3 decades in courtrooms. I decided to trust her. It wasn't easy. For the next week I played a role. Whenever Daniel called, I sounded tired, defeated, broken. I stopped asking questions, stopped mentioning paperwork, stopped talking about signatures. Instead, I only asked about Lily. That wasn't an act. She was still my whole world. Every afternoon I sat beside her bed. Sometimes I held her hand. Sometimes I brushed her hair. Sometimes I simply watched the sunlight move across the hospital room. One afternoon I whispered, "Your first-grade teacher is going to be very disappointed if you miss the first day of school." No answer. I smiled anyway. "You still owe me a rematch in checkers." Daniel visited almost every evening. Something about him had changed. He seemed lighter, less tense, as though he believed the hardest part was over. One evening he sat beside Lily's bed and quietly said, "I've been talking with the insurance company." There it was again. Insurance. I kept my eyes on Lily. "They've been very helpful." "I'm glad. I'll probably have to handle some financial matters soon." I nodded without looking at him. "If that's what needs to happen." He studied my face carefully, almost like he was checking whether I suspected anything. Apparently he liked what he saw. When he left the room, I texted Sarah. "He's relaxed now." She replied almost immediately, "Good, stay patient." 3 days later, Sarah called me into her office. When I arrived, she was practically grinning. "I've got something." "What?" She handed me a subpoena response from the hospital's email server. It included dozens of internal emails. Most were routine: scheduling, staffing, patient updates. Then one subject line caught my attention. R.E. Carter consent documentation. Sarah opened it. An administrator named Melissa Granger had written, "Need maternal authorization uploaded before noon, father becoming impatient." Another employee replied, "Still waiting." Then 23 minutes later, "Completed." No mention of speaking with me. No confirmation that I'd been contacted. Just completed. I felt sick. They were treating my signature like a missing attachment. Sarah nodded. "Exactly." That afternoon, another unexpected piece fell into place. Rachel called. "You need to hear this." "I'm listening." I was charting at the nurses' station, and Daniel came in looking for Melissa. The administrator. "Yes," Rachel lowered her voice. "I couldn't hear everything." "What did you hear?" He said. She paused. "Just make sure everyone remembers it happened the way we discussed." I looked across Sarah's office. She was already writing notes. Rachel continued. "Melissa told him people were asking too many questions. And then," he laughed. Rachel's voice hardened. "He actually said, 'Emily doesn't have anything. She'll never prove it.'" I closed my eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't heartbroken. I was angry. Not loud, explosive anger. The quiet kind. The kind that settles deep inside you. The next morning, Sarah received another phone call. This one came from a federal investigator assigned to healthcare fraud. Apparently, our lawsuit had caught someone's attention. The investigator asked one question. "Has anyone requested the hospital's backup servers?" Sarah smiled. "Not yet." "Do it." Within hours, an emergency preservation order was issued. No emails, no computer files, no electronic records could legally be deleted. Later that afternoon, Sarah leaned back in her chair. "If Daniel or anyone else tries destroying evidence now," she shrugged, "that's a separate crime." That evening, I returned to Lily's room. I took her tiny hand in mine. "I think we're getting closer, sweetheart." The machines continued their steady rhythm. I looked at her peaceful face. "I don't know how this ends." I swallowed hard. "But I promise you one thing." I gently squeezed her fingers. "No matter how painful it gets, I'm not letting anyone rewrite your story." As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. Only 4 words. "You need to come." Then another message appeared. Someone just confessed. Sarah's office was already full when I arrived. The federal investigator sat at one end of the conference table. Across from him was a middle-aged man in a Navy suit who introduced himself as Special Agent Brian Foster from the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. That got my attention. I hadn't expected federal investigators to become involved. Sarah motioned for me to sit. "The person who confessed isn't Daniel." "Then who?" "The hospital's IT technician." I immediately thought of Ethan. Sarah nodded. "It's him." Ethan looked exhausted when he entered the room. He kept twisting his wedding ring. "I've never done anything like this," he said. "No one's accusing you," Sarah replied. "I still feel responsible." He placed a flash drive on the table. "I made a copy before anyone could erase it." The investigator asked quietly. What's on it? Server logs. He swallowed hard. They show every change made to Lily Carter's electronic record. The room fell silent. Agent Foster plugged the drive into his government laptop. Nobody spoke while the files loaded. Finally, he stopped scrolling. There it is. He enlarged one screen. Everyone leaned forward. It showed the forged refusal authorization. Below it was something I had never seen before. Original user Melissa Granger. Edited by Melissa Granger. Electronic signature attached Emily Carter. Location Administrative Office. Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Timestamp 9:42:17 a.m. Exactly the same time I had been inspecting military inventory nearly 70 miles away. Agent Foster looked at Ethan. Can anyone alter this log? No. Delete it. No. Why not? It's mirrored on 2 independent backup servers. Sarah looked at me. This is what we've been waiting for. 3 weeks later, Vanderbilt agreed to an emergency administrative hearing. Hospital executives attended. Department heads attended. Insurance attorneys attended. Daniel arrived wearing a charcoal gray suit. He looked confident, almost relaxed. When he noticed me, he offered a small nod. I didn't return it, Sarah quietly whispered. Let him talk. The hearing began at 9 o'clock. One executive after another described hospital procedures, policies, protocols, safety standards. Everything sounded polished, professional. Then Daniel testified. He dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief. I only wanted what was best for my daughter. His voice cracked. I trusted the doctors. Several people in the room looked sympathetic. Then Sarah stood. She carried only one thin folder. No speech, I whispered. She smiled. I don't need one. Mr. Carter, she began calmly. You've testified that your wife declined emergency surgery. Yes. You personally heard her refuse. Yes. Sarah nodded. What day was that? Wednesday. What time? Around 10 in the morning. She wrote something down. And where was Mrs. Carter? At the hospital. Sarah looked toward the investigator. Agent Foster stood and handed copies of Army duty records to everyone in the room. Sarah smiled politely. Actually, she looked back at Daniel. Mrs. Carter was conducting a military inspection at Fort Campbell. Daniel blinked. You'd like to change your testimony. He swallowed. I may have remembered the time wrong, Sarah continued. No problem. She displayed the electronic server logs on the large screen. Every person in the room turned toward it. The electronic refusal was uploaded from inside this hospital. Silence. Not Fort Campbell. Another click. Melissa Granger's name filled the screen. Another click. The audit history. Another click. The failed phone calls. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. Never connected. Sarah's voice never rose. She simply kept presenting one fact after another. Then came the final witness, Rachel. She walked slowly to the front of the room, hands shaking, voice barely above a whisper. I was on duty. She looked directly at the hearing panel. The surgical team wanted to take Lily into the operating room. One executive shifted uncomfortably. Rachel continued. They were told to wait. By whom? Sarah asked. Rachel looked across the room, straight at Daniel. Her father. The room became so quiet I could hear someone coughing in the hallway. Rachel wasn't finished. He kept saying, her voice broke. Don't move forward until the refusal is uploaded. Nobody spoke, not the executives, not the attorneys, not even Daniel. His lawyer slowly closed his notebook. Then, without saying a word, he leaned over and whispered something into Daniel's ear. Daniel's face lost every bit of color. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked afraid. And I knew. He finally understood that the story he'd worked so hard to create had just fallen apart in front of everyone who mattered. I always imagined that if the truth ever came out, I'd feel victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. Deep down in my bones, the kind of tired that comes after weeks of sleeping in hospital chairs, eating vending machine dinners, and trying to stay strong because there wasn't any other choice. The hearing ended just before noon. No one rushed toward Daniel anymore. The same executives who had been nodding while he testified now avoided looking at him altogether. Melissa Granger quietly slipped out a side door with her attorney. She looked nothing like the confident administrator I'd seen behind that glass office. Within an hour, Vanderbilt placed her on administrative leave. By the end of the week, she'd resigned. The federal investigation moved much faster than I expected. Sarah warned me not to celebrate. This is only the beginning. She was right. Over the next month, I sat through interviews with investigators from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Federal Healthcare Fraud Agents and the District Attorney's Office. Each interview lasted hours. Every detail mattered. What time did Daniel call you? What exactly did Dr. Patel say? When did you first request the medical records? Sometimes they asked the same question 3 different ways. Not because they doubted me, because they wanted every fact to match. It did, because I had nothing to hide. The hardest interview belonged to Dr. Patel. I happened to see him leaving one afternoon as I waited outside an investigator's office. He looked 10 years older. When he noticed me, he stopped. I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything. I believed the paperwork. His shoulders sagged. I should have questioned it. I studied his face. There wasn't any arrogance left. Only regret. I trusted the system, he said quietly. So did I. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he added something I'll never forget. In medicine, sometimes we become so focused on documents that we forget the person standing in front of us. I nodded. I hope none of you ever forget Lily. His eyes filled with tears. I won't. Daniel was arrested 6 weeks after the hearing. Not at home. Not at the hospital. At the accounting firm where he'd recently started consulting. The local news covered it that evening. The charges filled nearly half the screen. Forgery. Healthcare fraud. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Obstruction of an official investigation. The reporter said additional charges could follow. I turned the television off before they finished. I didn't need to hear anymore. The real surprise came 2 days later. Daniel asked if I would meet him. Sarah strongly advised against it. If you go, I want investigators present. So we met in a small interview room at the county jail. There was a steel table, 4 plastic chairs, a camera in one corner. Daniel looked thinner. His orange jail uniform seemed too large for him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. I never wanted Lily to die. I believed him, at least partly. I think you convinced yourself everything would work out, I said. He stared at the table. I thought... His voice cracked. I thought we'd have more time. More time. To fix the paperwork. To control the money. To stay ahead of the questions. Whatever he'd been planning, reality had caught up with him. I was drowning, he whispered. I know. The debts. I know. I kept telling myself I could fix everything. I took a slow breath. You had 100 chances to tell the truth. He closed his eyes. I was ashamed. I stood. This stopped being about shame the moment you chose paperwork over our daughter. He didn't argue. He couldn't. As I reached the